How long did Nords sit around doing nothing all freaking day? What's going on, YouTube? We're taking a break from defending Glade's Mist from the evil Aldmeri Dominion because we have an upcoming ESO event that is huge, and it is going to be able to give you access to pretty much every single overland dungeon trial set at an increased rate by putting in the reward boxes for you to get. So we need to break down what set should you be focused on depending on what type of player you are. What type of content are you trying to pivot into or just interested in having in reserves? That's what we're going to break down in this video. And this event is going to start January 23rd and run through February 4th. And you can literally get reward boxes by doing anything. Delves, public dungeons, final dungeon bosses, final trial bosses, world bosses, incursions, which are your dolmens, geysers, dragons, etc. And you're going to be able to get sets from the zone that you acquired the coffer in, meaning that if you're farming the world bosses in a specific overland zone, you're going to be getting additional items from the reward boxes there. That also works if you're getting things such as final dungeon reward loot as well. So that begs the question, what exactly should you be farming during this event? Because the opportunities are pretty much endless. So I'm going to break this video down into basically solo content, PvE content, and then PvP content, just because they're a little bit different. I'm going to try to hit the highlights, but definitely also check the comments below because they will fill in all the good sets that did not make it into this video. And as we jump into it, just be sure to like and subscribe. I try not to do super long YouTube intros. Let's jump into the sets that you should collect. And as we get started with our first one of solo content, we got to start with the staples. Sergeant's Mail comes from Wayrest Sewers 1s and 2. It's a base game set. It's the best staple solo set in the game. What exactly does a solo set mean? It means that it's generally good for overland content, single arenas, infinite archive type things. It's also good if you want to take a solo build somewhere as well. Heavy attacking is very, very good, and that's what this set specializes in. So farm this set, you'll be able to fill out that sticker book twice as fast, which is great because generally you also, I believe, want to use the jewelry of this set depending on what you pair it with as well. Another really nice, easy to get solo set is Overwhelming Surge. Now this one comes from Tempest Island. When you deal damage with a class ability, you surround yourself with a torrent that deals 149 shock damage within 8 meters of you every 1 second for 6 seconds. 15% of the damage you deal this way is restored to you as magicka. This effect can occur once every 7 seconds. So, especially if you're struggling with a bit of sustain, this one, the damage is decent, but it's not going to be nearly as good as the heavy attacks that you're stacking with your other sets. But the sustain that you get for your magicka for this set is pretty good for solo content, especially if you're in some long, drawn-out arena or world boss fights. Next up is Noble Duelist, which is great because it's also a base game dungeon. It's the Blessed Crucible, which will give you access to when you deal damage with a light or heavy attack in melee range, you increase the damage of your light and heavy attacks against monsters by 2110 for 15 seconds. This can occur once every 12 seconds. Obviously, we've talked about it. Heavy and light attacking, some of the easier ways to defeat things. It's great for resource management. It's easy to stack with some of the other sets, such as the Sergeant set. Noble Duelist is also a great pickup if you're getting into some solo type builds. There's also a decent build, too, that if you want to take this even into things like Baitstrand Arena, Maelstrom Arena, Noble Duelist with Sergeant's Mail, with Oaken Soul, it's going to give you well more than enough that you need to do to get through the final bosses pretty easily. Next up, we have Storm Master, also from Tempest Island. When you deal critical damage with a fully charged heavy attack, your light and heavy attacks deal an additional 1542 damage to monsters for 8 seconds. This can occur once every 5 seconds. So, specific to monsters, that's important. You're not going to want to take this heavy attack build and try to kill people in Imperial City or Cyrodiil. But if you are doing the arena solo content that we've talked about, you can see stacking light and heavy attacking is generally the way to go. Some solo builds also like to build and sustain, like the one that we had touched upon earlier, but this does exactly the former. Next up is from Etherean Archive. Now, this one might seem intimidating because it comes from a trial, but trust me, this is a pretty cupcake-esque trial for you to do. A lot of people like to do this. A lot of jewelry comes from this one, decently farmed. And it's a good stepping stone into getting some nicer trial mechanics. It involves a little teamwork, makes the dream work. But notably, one of the sets there, Infallible Mage, is great for solo content. It gives you crit chance, minor slayer, weapon and spell, and add some crit chance, and your heavy attacks deal an additional 900 damage to monsters. Enemies you damage with a fully charged heavy attack are also afflicted with minor vulnerability, increasing their damage taken by 5%. So you can see the theme for solo content. These are all the sets that are really going to be focused on dealing damage with light and heavy attacks that I would generally recommend for you. And this one will also give you a little bit of trial experience. Another decent option for you is Hexo's Ward. Hexo's Ward is one of the most popular sets in the game. It's a bit divisive because some people hate getting shields from solo play. A lot of people think that you should be really focused on dealing damage and getting damage back through health, either through like Pale Order Ring or using things such as Crit Surge that heal you while you deal damage. But Hexo's Ward is just a nice 5-piece set. Dealing critical damage grants you a damage shield. It's just very relatively straightforward. It comes from the Deadland, so you'll be able to overfarm it by just farming an overland zone. And before we move on to PvP content, I do want to shout out Undaunted Weaver. When you use an ability that costs stamina while in combat, you increase the damage of your light and heavy attacks against monsters by 1645 for 10 seconds. Also another great substitutional option. And as we jump into the PvP gear, this is just a quick reminder, because obviously there's going to be tons of sets that aren't mentioned because they're craftable. Craftable sets obviously don't count because you're not going to get a reward box for those. Also, monster sets, not going to be highlighting those, or mythics. These are just going to be really focused on Overland Dungeon and Trial gear. Let's jump into it. One of the most popular sets right now is Tarnished Nightmare. It comes from Bedland Vale. It does crit chance, crit chance, crit chance, and then when you deal critical damage to an enemy, glass shards burst 8 meters around them after 1.3 seconds, dealing 1129 physical damage to enemies in the burst and applying the Sundered status effect. This can occur once every 8 seconds, and if you've been to Cyrodiil recently, you've seen a lot of this. Next up from the Dread Cellar is Rush of Agony. I feel kind of bad recommending this set because it's a bit annoying if you come across it, but when you deal direct damage with a blink, charge, leap, teleport, or pull, you begin to amass power. After 0.8 seconds, pull enemies within 12 meters, and then after 2 seconds, deal 1705 physical damage to all enemies within 7 meters. This effect can occur once every 8 seconds and scales off your weapon and spell damage. And this pull will not apply crowd control immunity to a target. So it's unfortunately very popular, but you can't deny that it's one of the best PvP dungeon sets in the game. Next up, if you're already farming Hexo's Ward, Kind Marcher's Cruelty is a decent PvP set. When you deal direct damage, you add 1 of 5 major debuffs to all enemies within 8 meters of you for 18 seconds. This effect can occur once every 8 seconds and only if an enemy is in range. Eligible effects are Major Breach, Cowardice, Defile, Maim, and Vulnerability. This isn't as good as it used to be for PvP, but if you're already farming Hexo's Ward, it's a decent one to also go for. Even though sets like Wretched Vitality usually steal the show for PvP, that doesn't take away from the fact that Amber Plasm is also a good set as well. It comes from a dungeon, Runes of Mazatoon, and it gives you 245 Magicka recovery, Stamina recovery, and Health recovery, with some decent 2, 3s, and 4s that can go along with it. If you've ever been in a PvP situation and you've seen a gigantic Eldritch Horror spawn right behind you and smack you, that was Scavenging Demise. It comes from Depths of Malatar. It's very popular for stealthy type kits, because when you deal critical poison damage to an enemy, you summon a Scavenging Maul, which attacks your enemy after 2 seconds. The Scavenging Maul deals 2587 physical damage and also afflicts minor vulnerability for 15 seconds, increasing their damage taken by 5%, and this can occur every 10 seconds. Next up, we're going to finish on a trial set from Sanctum Ophidia. Now, this one, when you deal damage, your offensive penetration is increased by 544 for 5 seconds, but this stacks up to 10 times. So you can deal damage pretty quickly. You get tons of offensive penetration. Some rapid fire honorable mentions are Briarheart, which is a good overland set that comes from Hrothgar. Way of Fire that comes from Craglorn, which I'm so tempted to just want to love more. I think it really does decently on a sorcerer, but there are just so many other sets that just outclass it. Pariah, which also comes from Hrothgar, but is kind of meta dependent on how often you're going to see it. Right now, Mark of Pariah doesn't really see a whole lot of utilization. Burning Spell Weave, which is really just if you like to do flame damage, here's some more of that. And Back Alley Gourmand, which is good, but I think that there's just significantly better alternatives. And the other unfortunate reality, too, is with the event that happened recently for High Isle, the market was flooded with this set, so you don't really need to farm it. If you want to use a set like this, just go buy it. And as we get into PvE content for sets that you want to farm during this event, there's a lot. So we're going to try to keep it focused in this video, but in the description below, you're going to find resource to other people's websites that are more specific to things, especially healing, tanking, because we're going to hit some DPS highlights. But for some of the more niche things, like some of the support class ones, there's so many niche options for specific things that might be good in different contexts. So we're not going to break down all of those because that would bloat the video too long. But let's start with the highlights for DPS. And let's start with a trial that I think is going to be farmed quite a bit during this event, and that is Dreadsail Reef. Now, this is a really nice set because basically you add some critical chance. You also increase your weapon and spell damage by up to 740 based on your missing stamina reaching at maximum when you're below 33%. So basically, this is kind of like the second set that we're going to talk about here. But for DPS, it's fantastic. And because it's a trial set, you also get Minor Slayer and some other good 2, 3s, and 4s as well. And this is the one that I use. I use Perfected Psi. Adds 129 weapon and spell damage and increases your damage done to non-player enemies by up to 12% based on your missing magicka. So a little similar. It is noticeably weaker, in my opinion, in the current meta. Not as good as its, brethren, but it comes from Rockgrove, a also really fun trial to run, and also one that's really not super difficult as well. But if you're also farming Dreadsail, it's also good to pick up Whirl Adepts. When you deal damage with a light attack, you apply Whirl Adepts to a target, dealing 988 frost damage over 8 seconds. When this effect ends, a 5-meter whirlpool is created under the target for 6 seconds and deals 743 frost damage every 1 second. So you can see decent stacks, but this also is something that's static, which also can be good because if you're dealing damage to an area, that's pretty good as well. Next up is Azure Blight, which used to be a great PvP set. Unfortunately, those days have kind of passed, but it is still good for PvE. It does weapon and spell for its 2, 3, and 4, and then 5, basically every time you deal damage, the damage over time, you create a Blight Seed to the target for 5 seconds. If you get 20 of those bad boys, it explodes and deals disease damage to that target and nearby enemies, increasing by 150% in damage per monster hit, up to 600%. So you can see that could be pretty good if there's a lot of chunked up enemies, all around each other. Rune Carver from Scrivener's Hall, also notably decent for PvP, not a nerfed like the previous set was. It's 2, 3, and 4 weapon and spell, and offensive penetration is good, actually almost better for PvP, some would say. But when you deal with a damage over time effect, you also add an additional 209 flame damage every 3rd tick. So if you're doing a bunch of dots, this could be a good thing to do. But also, too, enemies in Cyrodiil, we don't want to have flame damage on us as well. So good for that, too. We're going to wrap up with some old but gold ones. That's Pillar of Nirn. Pillar of Nirn used to be the pinnacle, but it was nerfed. Comes from Falkreath Hold. When you deal damage, you create a fissure underneath the enemy after 1 second. You deal some bleed damage and then some extra damage over time. It's pretty good these days still, but it's not what it used to be. Another old but gold is Kinroz. Now, Kinroz actually might be better or worse depending on what you want to do with it. I know this is the PvE group section, but if you look at Kinroz as a solo set, it actually becomes significantly better because then you're not guaranteed to get Major Berserk from other places. And then while you have the aura active in the group members within 12 meters gain Minor Berserk. But sometimes these stacks can be a bit unhelpful. But when you deal damage with a light or heavy attack, you gain a stack of Burning Heart for 5 seconds, up to 5 stacks. While you have 5 stacks, you generate the aura granting you Major Berserk, giving you 10% increase to your damage done. And then while you have the aura of Wrath, group members also gain Minor Berserk. So you can see how this could be good. If you're not getting Major Berserk from anywhere, maybe it's a decent 5-piece set to use. But the problem with scribing and all the different options that we have now these days, it's just so hard to justify 5-piece sets that could be even considered a tiny bit redundant. And unfortunately, that's where I think Kinroz has kind of fallen out of favor a little bit as well. Because, like, for example, the set that we just looked at was just nerfed. Kinroz wasn't really nerfed. It's just kind of like, well, the buffs, And I do want to finish on shouting out Macabre's Vintage. This almost could be looked at as a solo set. It's almost more like a farming set. But it's 2, 3, and 4 weapon and spell damage from the Westweld. And then adds 150 weapon and spell damage. But when you kill a monster, they burst with blood magic, dealing 50% of their max health to enemies within 6 meters as bleed damage, up to 24,096 damage. This damage cannot critically strike, but this can occur once every 5 seconds. So XP farming, blowing up your enemies into blood. this is the go-to, and this is great for XP farming. Starting our support version of this video, we have Zens. Zens is great, but you'd only need one Zens wearer. Comes from Blair Marcelok. Your light attacks apply the touch of Zen to an enemy for 20 seconds. Enemies with a touch of Zen take an additional 1% more damage for each damage over time effect you have placed on them, up to 5%, but enemies can only have one of those effects on. So you only need one person to be wearing this set in a group. That's why it's considered really more of a support set, even though it, what we consider support versus damage is a bit cattywampus. Still a good set, though. Another great support set that can kind of be worn on some different support roles is Roar of Alkosh. Now, this comes from MOL, a trial, which could be a decent way to get an introduction into some trial content for you. When you activate a synergy, you send a shockwave that deals 318 physical damage, an additional 1590 physical damage over 10 seconds, but you reduce the physical and spell resistance of any enemy hit by the amount of your weapon and spell damage for the duration up to a maximum of 6,000. So you can see how that could be relatively helpful, especially on the type of content that you're doing. Another decent support set, Elemental Catalyst. When you deal flame, shock, or frost damage, you apply a stack of flame, shock, or frost weakness to an enemy for 3 seconds, but then each stack also increases their critical damage taken by 5%. So you can see why that would be helpful. And an enemy can only have one stack of each elemental weakness at a time, but they can have all of them. So one flame, one shock, one frost, for example. And this comes from Stone Gardens. As we get into tanking, this is going to look very similar to the set that we just looked at, because that's Crimson Oath. This comes from Walking Flames DLC for the Dread Cellar, which you may also be farming for other sets. While you're in combat, casting an ability, drinking a potion, or using a poison that applies a major or minor buff to yourself or an ally sends a shockwave that reduces the armor of nearby enemies within 12 meters for 3541 armor for 15 seconds. This effect can occur once every 12 seconds. It will only occur if there's an enemy within range, which is nice because that means that if you're buffing yourself getting into a conflict, if you're not actually in the conflict itself, it will not proc and will not have to be reset. Next up, we have Dave's favorite set, which is Pearlescent Ward. Now, this one gives you some health, but also grants you a unique bonus. It grants you and up to 11 other group members Pearlescent Ward. This bonus persists through death. Pearlescent Ward increases the weapon and spell damage by up to 180 based on group members that are currently alive. So if everybody's alive, you get 180. But then it also increases the damage reduction from non-player enemies if there are other players that are dead. So basically, it makes it easier to revive people if everybody's dead. And because it persists through death, it also means that it can be easier to pick up the tank as well, which is very helpful. Another Rock Grove set is Saxiel's Champion. Gives you a 1096 stamina. When you use an ultimate ability while in combat, you give everybody within 28 meters of you major force, which you can imagine. Pretty helpful. For 1 second per 15 ultimate spent, when that increases critical damage done by 20%. So you can get quite a lot of value out of that major force, as you can imagine. Next up, we have Olorime, which gives you 1096 Magicka. Casting an ability that leaves an effect on the ground in combat will create a circle of might. You and your group members in that circle get Major Courage, increasing your weapon and spell damage by 430 for 20 seconds. You might be noticing a bit of a trend with some of these tanking sets, is that they're really not focused on keeping you alive. That's kind of your responsibility to do. Most of these are just like, can we kill everything a little bit faster, please? That's kind of what tanking looks like in ESO, and this set comes from Cloud Rest. I do also want to shout out Drake's Rush, because when you bash an enemy, you and up to 3 group members within 15 meters gain Major Heroism for 12 seconds, which is pretty big, because it gives you 3 ultimate every 1.5 seconds. This can occur once every 18 seconds. It's a pretty big bonus. Next up, we have Spell Power Cure. We're getting into our healing sets here, but you notice that oftentimes we're still just giving a bunch of bonuses to people. This one comes from White Gold Tower. When you overheal yourself or an ally, you give that target Major Courage for 5 seconds, which increases their weapon and spell damage by 430. Next up, we have one of our more unique healing, in quotation mark, sets, because this one also comes from Dreadcell Reef. Pillager's Prophet. Casting an ultimate ability while in combat grants 5% of the ultimate spent up to a max of 20 as ultimate to you and up to 11 other group members within 12 meters every 2 seconds over 10 seconds. They can only be affected by this set once every 45 seconds, but other people could be affected by it more frequently if they were coming in and out of range. So this is a very unique set, gets ultimate up faster, but as you can imagine, ultimates are ultimate in what they do. Next up is Gervolds. While in combat, you increase the duration of all major, minor, and major buffs and damage shields you apply to yourself and allies by 40%. So this is very focused, obviously, on those buffs, damage shields, and giving them to your allies by increasing their duration. We've seen a lot of sets already that are very big on the buffs. You can stack those with this, and you can get a pretty significant duration. Also, too, it doesn't say that necessarily these are bad if you were to take this into PvP as well, but this is definitely more of a support set for PvE content. But if you're thinking ball groups, yeah, this would be used in that too. Next up is Roaring Opportunist from Kind's Aegis. After completing a fully charged heavy attack, you and 5 other group members gain Major Slayer, increasing your damage done to dungeon, trial, and arena monsters by 10%. For 1 second. For every 600 spell damage or 6,300 magicka you have, Roaring Opportunist can only affect a target every 22 seconds, maximum duration 12 seconds. So this is a very odd set and all the things that it's trying to do. Major Slayer is a decently rare buff, so being able to give that to other people is pretty helpful. Yeah, you do a lot of damage output with it. And even though you might be trying to heal people, you're probably also going to want to be making sure that things die quicker, because then you don't have to heal them as much. Next up is Stone Talker. Now, this is a trial set from Rockgrove. Your fully charged heavy attacks place a soul bomb on your target that charges as the target takes damage. After 10 seconds, the bomb explodes, restoring 5% of the damage received as magicka and stamina, up to 2,240 of both of those resources, to up to 12 group members within 16 meters of the explosion. So you can see here, this is more sustained focus. A lot of the other stuff we've been focused on are buffs, debuffs, weakening out enemies, strengthening allies. This one is a little bit more focused on your resources, which is decent. Next up, we're going to round us off with Hollow Fang's Thirst. When you deal healing critical strikes or when you critically damage a target, you spawn a ball of hemoglobin at the location. After 2 seconds, the ball explodes, restoring 1,750 magicka and applying minor vitality to you and your group members within 6 meters of the ball for 9 seconds, increasing your healing received and your damage shield strength by 6%. This can occur once every 9 seconds. So you can see to yourself, okay, we have access to not only get access to little shield strength, some extra healing received, we also get access to magicka, which can be very helpful depending on our group composition and what we're doing. But everyone, thank you so much for watching. This is a huge event, so please check out the comments below, because there's over 650 sets in the game, and I don't have time to cover every single one. I tried to focus on the staples, the good ones, but as you may know, I don't do all the types of content. I'm not really known for tanking or healing, and my DPS is sometimes hits like a pool noodle, depending on the patch that we're currently in. So thank you so much for watching. Check out the comments below for more suggestions. Let me know what set you're most excited to farm, and I will catch you guys later after I tell you how to do our 3 giveaway drawings, which are simply be subscribed/follow on Twitch and Twitter. Leave a comment in the comments below. And the third thing is look for a hidden word to be flashed upon the screen. Last month was a bit of a phrase, but this month it will be a single word. Thank you guys so much again for watching, and I'll catch you later. Bye, guys.
You better remember to like and subscribe to Jakeclips. Or you should. I might have to pluck your eyes if you don't. Or, better yet, I'll skip rope with your entrails. Do it now. Subscribe. Ta-ta. Off with you.